Good afternoon. As everyone's coming in, we're just going to give it a couple more minutes, make sure we get everyone in with us before we get started.
Which slide will you have on first?
It'll be that first one with your name on it.
The one with the, should I tell you when to put the map on? Or will you do it?
I can start with that one if you'd like. Just start on the map.
Half and half. How's that?
Okay.
Okay.
But yeah, anytime you want me to change, well, you just let me know. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give it another minute to make sure everyone gets in before we get started. For those who are just joining us, we're just going to give it one more minute, make sure everyone has time to get in before we get started with today's presentation. All right, well, I think we can go ahead and start. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Annie Black. I'm the Director of Programs and Volunteers for the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. We're so glad you could join us today for our Spring Break Survivor Speaker Series. I'd like to start by thanking our community partners for this series, Faith Forward Dallas at Thanksgiving Square, International Rescue Committee in Dallas, Legacy Senior Communities, the Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission, and the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. We really appreciate your ongoing support of the museum and its programs. We do very much encourage you to ask questions during today's presentation. If you want to go ahead and locate your Q&A button, it's likely at the bottom of your screen if you are on a computer. It might be at the top if you are on a tablet or mobile device. So again, at any point during the program, if you have a question, feel free to open that up, type your question in, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the program. Today, we are thrilled to have with us Rosian Zerner, one of our Holocaust survivor speakers. She's going to tell her story, so I don't want to step on any of that. So Rosian, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and I'll get your presentation started.
Welcome to the Dallas Holocaust Museum of Human Rights. I'm here as proof that miracles do happen. At a time when my entire world seemed to have been set on killing Jews, I was saved. When 6 million other Jews, 1,500,000 children were killed. And I'm here only because there were some individuals who stood up in righteousness and they risked their lives to save mine. And from ordinary became extraordinary and did was righteous, and now they are all honored at Yad Vashem because there are too few that did that during the wartime. Map, please, next, please. I was born in Lithuania, and you can see on the map, it's a very small country. It's the largest of the Baltic states, but it fits into Texas 10 times. And the entire population of the country is 6 million inhabitants less than in Texas. However, at one point, Lithuania ruled the entire Europe. In the 14th century, they were very powerful. And even now, there are interesting features about Lithuania. Their language is the oldest living language spoken in Europe, in the world, actually. It's based on Sanskrit. It is the center of Europe, it has the first university in Europe. It had 6,000 lakes, some of them are puddles, and it has started the domino effect that toppled the Soviet Union. It also was the last country to relinquish paganism, but now they're extremely religious. The Lithuania was called the Jerusalem of Europe, actually, because it was the seat of great Jewish learning in Vilnius. In Kaunas, the city I was born in 1935, there were 40 synagogues, lots of yeshivas, wonderful businesses, and a thriving community. On the right, you see a photograph of how it must have looked when I was born. And on the bottom, you see what Kaunas looks like now. It is called Kaunas by the Lithuanians, Kovno, depending whether you're talking to a Russian, to a Jew, or to a Lithuanian. So it could get kind of confusing at times. It is a lovely little sleepy but active community in there. And it is going to be one of the two culture cities of Europe in 2022. Next, please. This is my life before the war. It was a happy childhood. On the left, you see my beautiful mother. On the middle is a car that we had because we had a very privileged life with servants and gardeners and so forth. And you can see this a 1935 Ford with a very low license plate. There weren't too many cars in those days. My father is holding me in the next slide, and in the last slide, I am holding a book. I was a very precocious reader, and I was always with a book. Next. And this on the left is the last photo was taken of me before war broke out. I'm very fortunate to have some of the photos that survived, and it gives me the continuity of my life, and you will see some others later as well. On the right, we have the Soviets tanks rolling in to Kaunas, and next, please. Here you have Hitler's army coming into Klaipėda. Even before Hitler came in with the Anschluss, the Lithuanian collaborators were happy to kill Jews. On the bottom right, you see a horrendous scene where at the Litukis garage, which was just blocks where we lived, they actually put hoses into people's mouths with water until some of the Jews burst. But you can see the onlookers grinning in that scene, not helping at all. This was the beginning. 150 villages actually became Judenfrei, free of Jews, even before the Germans set foot in Lithuania. There was horrendous scenes where Jews were herded into synagogues and burned alive, and herded and murdered even by their neighbors. On the left is the synagogue, one of the 40 and the Great Synagogue. As you can see on the bottom, it was totally destroyed, and that was the only synagogue that was rebuilt later on after the war. All the 40 others were lost. Next, please. And here are some photos of the ghetto. We were herded into the ghetto as soon as the Nazi Germans arrived. It was a slum. We had 10 feet of space for each, about 700 calories per day, in one of the coldest winters of record in Lithuania. My parents managed to provide some potatoes and work. We were able to survive, but I remember just getting water from the snow and trying to hurry to my lips because otherwise it would freeze in the process. I still get emotional when I talk about it, but I survived the Großaktion, which was when the Nazis rounded up all the Jews in the ghetto and had them going to the right and to the left, just like you have seen in the movies, who should live and who should die. And afterwards, they took them to the nearby Ninth Fort and shot them, all 10,000 of them, within hearing distance practically for where we lived. We realized at that point that we couldn't possibly survive because the future was death, basically. And my parents decided that I would be the first to leave because there was no way for safety for them, and children were dispensable. After I left, there was a children's action, just like the gross action that I just described, and most of the children were taken away to be murdered. My parents decided that I would escape, but how? So they dug a hole under the barbed wire, timing the guards, timing the flashlight, the searchlights, and they had to do it very surreptitiously because they only had minutes to go under the wires and dig. It was a long process, but finally there was a hole that they dug, each time dangerously putting themselves at risk and knowing that they would immediately be murdered should they be discovered. So they were really my first rescuers. And one day I actually was pushed through. Could you go back to the ghetto, please? To the previous, yeah. Actually was pushed through that hole, and I went over the bridge of the Gimmon River, where I was met by one of the rescuers. But before I go, I wanted to describe the photos that were on the screen. On the left, you see two toddlers practically who were wearing the yellow star we were all supposed to wear. My elderly grandmother was denounced in a bread line because she had absentmindedly forgotten to wear the yellow star. A neighbor denounced her and she was never seen again. My grandfather, who was well-to-do, was also killed in the first days because they wanted his possessions. On the next slide on the right, you see two women saying goodbye, probably for the last time. The photo on the left on the bottom describes a makeshift jail that was on the premises. In the middle, there's a man trying to hide some items into the well there. And on the upper right, you see a boy just about my age with a soup bowl, hoping to get something to eat. Thank you. Next, please. And here are the rescuers. On the left is Bronya, who was my father's secretary, who met me on the other side of the barbed wire. And we ran into freedom over the bridge into her apartment. But I was crying so much that I was endangering her life, and she just couldn't keep me. But she did give me her name. I had a wartime name of Irena Budreikaite, and she pretended to be my mother and that I was her bastard child, and she had to give me away. And that was the narrative I had for the war. In the middle, upper middle, you see, in the middle of the middle photo, you see Rivka, who is Jewish, she was a journalist, and she engaged the two Natashas. They both had the first name on each side to rescue me. And they were Christian scientists, and they were endangered themselves, but they did what their religion prescribed and what was the right thing to do. Yad Vashem now has about 27,000 rescuers from Lithuania. That's a lot, but it is also not enough because there were so many that could have been saved that are no longer with us. Artists, professors, taxi drivers, anybody who could have enhanced society. And each life is important. And when you see the numbers that have been mentioned, 6 million and sometimes 11 million, it's unimaginable. Well, I'm digressing because below that photo is a photo of Helene Holzmann on the right with her two daughters. Helene was a German married to a Jew, and her husband was killed immediately, and her daughter, one of the daughters, was a pacifist, and she went with, like a flower child, went to soldiers trying to convince them that this war was wrong. And of course, she was killed right away. The one on the left is Margarete, and she survived, and they both had to flee Lithuania when the Russians arrived because they were Germans, even though they saved people. I visited them in Germany sometimes, and Margarete died just a couple of years ago. On the right, upper right in color is a more recent photo of one of the Natashas. When I went back to visit them, I visited my rescuers often and as much as I could with my own children. And my family was good to them, packages, and we tried to be in touch. But how can you ever thank for a life? There's never enough that can be done. So I have to live my life in gratitude, and that's what I do. On the bottom is my main rescuer. Her name is Lida. And yes, I'm the one with the short hair. My hair was shaven because of lice, and it was just growing back. Lida was a saint. She saved all these people. There was a deaf mute who would have been killed by the Germans. There was a widow who was Russian, and she would have been killed. And she just saved others that went back to Israel and left a great legacy of goodness. Next, please. So on the left is a photo that you will see later on as well. I am at Lida's farm, and this photo was used by United Nations at their 2013 UNESCO Day of Remembrance in Paris. It was plastered all over. I was told even in elevators and in restrooms, but they chose it from the museum in Washington, the Holocaust Memorial Museum, because to show that even during these horrendous times, there were smiles. And I think my attitude is really what kept me through that. And I'm still that way now, I guess. In the middle, you have one of my paintings during wartime, flowers. I've been painting for a long time, still do occasionally. And it's flowers. And that you see in the next painting, it's flowers. I'm holding flowers. On the right side is where the houses where I was hiding in Rita's farm. As you can see, it's quite rudimentary. There was a barn. We sometimes had to hide there when people were coming that didn't expect children to live there. And this was taken when I went back to Lithuania to visit. Next. This is what the Soviets found when they came back to Lithuania. Rubble of the ghetto. What the Nazis did was they burnt down the ghettos. There were two of them. First was this smaller ghetto, and they burnt down a hospital with all the medical personnel, patients, nurses inside. And then finally, they burned the rest of it down. The larger ghetto where we lived was a bit more, had a little more time, but it was also burned down, and the people who tried to escape were also shot. On the top, you see the Soviets exhuming some of the pits of bodies, and they had to face that as well. Next. Oh, this is when the war ended. On the upper left, I'm with my dad and my mother after the war. My mother and my father survived, which is another miracle in my life, because to have an intact family in Lithuania was a miracle. 96% of Jews were killed in Lithuania about in a year. And having parents was almost unheard of. I mean, you're looking at a 4%er there. 10% of the entire Lithuanian population was killed in 1 year because they were Jewish. My mother survived because she had been studying piano with Nadia Boulanger in Paris and at her school. And she spoke fluent French. So she passed herself off as a widow of a French soldier. What she did is one day when she walked out of the ghetto with her people, she simply took off the yellow star and disappeared behind a building. And she called some of the people that we knew, like Rivka and the Natashas, and she was also saved before she went out on her own as the French woman. It was dangerous for her as well. My father decided he did not want to stay in the ghetto because it was certain death. And he had a German boss where he was at the work detail, Fritz Zimmermann, who actually went into the ghetto, picked him up in his truck and brought him to freedom. My father then walked from Kaunas to Vilnius, which is quite a distance, to the other ghetto there, because from there he could join the partisans, where the freedom fighters against Nazis. And well, they both have their own histories, but they're no longer here to tell. We escaped Lithuania from the Russians as soon as we could, because my father had been given a very important positions because of his business connections. And then they decided that he was a Jew and he couldn't do that. So we didn't wait to find out what they were going to do with him. So we just escaped with false passports. And the map on the bottom right shows our journey. We had a lot of passports And it was very dangerous because they were illegal. Actually, we ended up in Hungary in a jail because they caught us. And my father, with his ingenuity, was able to bribe ourselves out of there and back to Austria. Austria was divided at that time. We were in the British sector, and you can see in the upper right, British soldiers with me. And on the lower left, my mother, who no longer with the piano, but entertaining with an accordion. Because music was always a big thing in our lives. Next, please. And here's my life in Italy. At first, we were destitute. We had nothing. We slept on cement floors of the Jewish community in Lithuania, and we had nothing to eat practically except what the Jewish community would donate. My parents actually found out about this place in Salvino called Chiesopoli, which was an old Nazi R&R place with marble floors, a swimming pool, and so forth, that was housing orphans, Jewish orphans from all over Europe. The bottom left photo shows the morning roll call for all the orphaned children, including me, because there was no place for me to be. And on the upper right, it shows me dancing with a troupe that had costumes made from sheets. And we actually had education to prepare us to go to Israel to make Aliyah. But my father, again, became prosperous, but after reconnecting with all his contacts in South Africa and in England and so forth. And here we are in the upper left at Lake Como on our Sunday outing, which was very, very usual. We always had an outing on Sundays. And on the upper middle, the color photo is of La Scala, the world-renowned theater that is in Milan. And I was probably the first foreigner admitted to their school of ballet, which was a big deal in those days. And I was with them only for a year because I craved an education, and it was dance, which I loved, but it was practically 7 days a week with practicing and not learning anything except maybe the French words of the postures. On the bottom middle, I am again with flowers, still in Salvino, and I'm smiling everywhere again. This was the first country where I finally had an education. I was put into a Jewish school at the age of 10, and with other children and from all countries. And then I went to another school after that, which combined 3 years in one. And I only had an education that was stable when I came to the United States, because they put me into the 9th grade, again, without knowing the language, because I didn't know the language in Italy. I didn't know English. And when there was a math question, I didn't understand the question, never mind the answer. So my education was very, very spotty, but it worked. I'm here. Next, please. This is our voyage to the United States. On the left, you see all the mugshots on our passports when we were traveling here. On the bottom left, I want to introduce you to my brother, who was born 12 years after I was born, and he's Italian. So everyone in our family is practically from a different country. My father is from Lithuania, my mother is from Germany, And yeah, I guess I'm from Lithuania also. So, and my brother's from Italy. So typical Jewish family. So on the upper right, I am on the SS Independence, which was still cruising the waters in Hawaii in the 80s. I had my 16th birthday on there. It was embarrassing. I had to go back to my room at 10 o'clock on my 16th birthday, even though the captain had given me a 16th birthday party because my parents were so strict. Yeah, that's still in my psyche somewhere. Next, please. And here is my life in the United States. I on the upper left is where I am at Barnard. I applied to 7 colleges. I didn't think I'd get in any, and I went to an Ivy League school that I chose because my friend, the only friend I had from Europe, was in New York. Crazy way to choose a school. In that photo, I'm a football player on stage. In the same play, I think I was a chemistry professor and a torch singer, but this is the photo we have. On the right of that photo, I am on the main statue in Columbia University. Barnard is part of Columbia, was part of Columbia, now they're independent. On the right, you see me with my parents and my sons and brother. I was a blonde then. And my 2 sons are now grown up, as you can see in the bottom picture. And the redhead and the one with the Beatles cut are now bald, but we're a very small and happy family. You can see the grandchildren on the left. And here we are. I have grandchildren. Hitler lost. We have a continuity in Jewish life that he had not intended to happen. We're grateful and happy and looking forward to many more generations. Next. And here, this was titled My Legacy, because I wanted to live my life in gratitude for my rescuers, but I never considered myself to be a survivor. My parents were, but who was I? And one day, I kind of tried to take a hold of my life and say, I'm making the same mistakes over and over again. Why? And I realized I totally blocked out my childhood. So what I did is I went back to Lithuania to retrace my steps. I didn't want to live fragmented. I want to be a whole person again with my childhood. Even though it was very painful, I faced every step from the ghetto to my hiding places, and I reconciled myself to the horrors of then and the privilege of life now. So I decided to dedicate myself to honoring and commemorating the victims of the Holocaust, as well as giving back to the survivors of the Holocaust. I became involved in organizations that were international as well as national in high positions. I did projects that contributed to a $10 million education grant for Holocaust education. And I spoke. On the upper left is a photo where I'm flanked by the National Guard in Houston at the March of Remembrance. This was recently when I moved to Texas 7 years ago. And on the bottom, where this, I am with Robert Bingham, who is one of the 11 sons of Hiram Bingham IV, who is a diplomat in France who saved lives by signing visas. He was, of course, shunned by the government because he was going against government orders, but I collaborated on this project to have a United States postal stamp issued for him to honor him. And although there are 500,000 stamps applications a year, I understand, and he was demoted by the State Department for going against United States orders, we actually had the stamp. So here I am with Robert Bingham in the rotunda in Washington at the launching of the stamp. And the stamp is on the left bottom and it's covered by my name, but it is there. So that was a very joyous occasion of accomplishment. On the middle, I'm showing off a citation I received. That citation was the first ever given by the governor of Massachusetts for volunteering. And my work was with Holocaust survivors and commemorating the victims. The Senate gave me another one, and I cherish that very much because it reaffirmed the importance of what I was doing, because I'm the last generation of eyewitnesses, and with all the deniers and the rampant anti-Semitism, it is important to spread the truth, to let people know that both horrible things happened and wonderful things, and people came forward to show that there is humanity in each and every one that can be enhanced. On the bottom of the photo on the right is that photo that I showed you before of the smiling peasant that I was in those days. I was on the cover of the booklet that I still have of UNESCO. It doesn't come out very well in this photo, but it's there. And that photo really got some mileage. On the top is a mural that was just done recently, in, I believe, about 4 or 5 months ago in Kaunas, where I was born. And there were two, actually. There were two huge murals on the side of a home. And I guess it was in anticipation of being the culture city of Europe that they were doing all this wonderful artwork there. And on the bottom left is one of my most cherished photos. It shows me with John Lewis, the last survivor of the Selma 6. And I cherish it because racism is anti-Semitism, and we have still a road ahead of us for justice and tolerance and acceptance. And the museum here, the Dallas Holocaust Museum of Human Rights, is doing much to further that. There's an exhibit even now that if you missed it, hurry up and see it because it closes in May. So this has been my legacy, really. And I want to close with the next slide. And you can read it, but I will also read it to you. Actually, part of it's covered partially. I'll read it from here. First, they came from the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. This was done by German pastor Martin Müller. This is my message to all of you who are watching and listening. Because when you go back from this presentation to your friends and family, you can become the upstanders that the museum is so featuring. You can become the prophets to spread the word for a better world, for a greater understanding, for more love. You can be that drop in the water that keeps on going on in our cells, in our thoughts, in our heart. Even if it's small, it changes the path. You can become involved, you can speak the truth and counter the waves of hate that is coming our way from so many directions. I want to thank you for being here. And I want to tell you that we as Jews are commanded to remember Zachor and also to do tikkun olam, which is to make it a better world. Each life saved is as you save the world. And you can become part of saving the world in your way, on your terms, and contribute whatever you can, wherever you can, and remember. I will leave you with the words probably the most spoken in Israel culture. It's shalom. It means peace. Peace like in your heart and peace in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosian. We really appreciate you sharing your story. We do have some questions for you, if that's okay. And again, if you have questions, you still have time to put those in the Q&A if you'd like. But our first question is about when you were in hiding. Do you remember how you felt? Were you scared? Were you just happy to be out of the ghetto? What did you feel when you were in hiding?
I was totally confused and petrified. I didn't know why people wanted to kill me. I was 6 years old at that time or so. I was trying to be a good girl, doing what people said, and I still had to hide who I am and make sure that I wasn't around when people came that could have suspicions. I also had 3 mothers. My original mother, my true mother, actually came to visit me once, and she brought me a doll that she put together from scraps of wool. And I cherished that doll until it disintegrated, I think. The other mother, when came to visit, was Bronya, whose narrative was that I was her bastard child. But the one that was my mother and acted like my mother during the war was Lida, my rescuer. So I called her mother. So this was my life in hiding. And I had to go from hiding place to hiding place because suspicions were raised. So it usually took anywhere from 7 to 12 rescuers to rescue someone. And so it was not a time of wonderful childhood. If you can think back at your childhood when you were between 6 and 8, what do you remember?
Thank you. Our next question, you mentioned you still do art, and so someone wants to know if art has been therapeutic for you.
I never thought of art as therapy. I just thought it was a self-expression, and I had an adventure trying different mediums, different times, and I still wish I had time and place to store everything that I could create. But for many, art is therapy, and there's a special way that Holocaust survivors express themselves to art, there's an inordinate amount of artists among Holocaust survivors and psychologists, and also, but because um, we never were able to express ourselves as children. And this is one of the ways that we can do so. Thank you for asking.
Our next question is about some of the family photos that we saw. How were you all able to save those pictures?
Another miracle. Yeah. My mother's family waited until I was born in Kaunas and then emigrated to Israel the next day. And they founded a kibbutz there. They were leaders in some political parties, and they were very much Israeli Sabras in some ways. My parents kept sending them photos, and you can see that most of the photos are before the war. And I have even more that I donated to the museum in Washington with my collection that anybody can access if they wanted to. But the ones that were retrieved were the ones from the relatives in Israel. And yeah, that was pretty unusual because not many have photographs.
Our next question is about your family's religion, your faith. Was your family religious, and did that help kind of get you through not just the Holocaust, but that difficult time after when you were traveling around trying to find a new home?
It's a bit complicated. I come from a long line of rabbis. Some of them were rabbis, they performed miracles, but my immediate family was secular. And my father could never understand how God would allow the horrors of the Holocaust. So at home, we never really had much ritual, Jewish ritual. I never belonged to a Jewish synagogue. And I was baptized because some of my rescuers didn't want to lie that I was Christian. And I really went into this. I was going to become a nun when I grew up. So that was another issue. Then I started reading books, and I became involved in many religions for study, from Eastern philosophies to in Judaism to Christianity to world religions in general. But I was never observant in the way that is traditional.
Our next question is about when you traveled back to Lithuania. You mentioned that
I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry, sometimes my mic does funny things. Our next question is about when you first went back to Lithuania. You mentioned you had realized that you were maybe suppressing some things from your childhood. What was that first trip like, going back to Lithuania and processing everything that had happened to you and your family?
Well, it was like opening a Pandora's box. You know, you can't close it after you open it. And all the painful, horrific experiences came back to me. I was a basket case most of the time. And it's almost like a catharsis where you face the monsters and then know they are there, but you're there too. And I focused again on the positive, and I turned it around to help others with my experience. And I'm still processing some of the things. We never grow up, even at the age of 85, you know. So we have the memories, we have the present, we have what we want for the future, and facing the experiences helped me and also helped others, basically, because I realized what they went through.
Our next question, which is a similar vein, maybe. Someone would like to know if you shared your story with your children when they were younger, or did it take a while to open up that piece to them?
Oh, to them, I'm just mom. You know? My grandchildren became interested, and my son, one of my sons, is very much interested. He started collecting memorabilia, and we were actually going to go to Italy to retrace our post-war steps in Italy together when COVID broke out in Milan, exactly where we were going. So the other son respects my experiences, and I think it's a little overwhelming for him. But they have to take all the aspects of me because this is who I am.
Exactly. Well, Rosian, that was our last question. I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us. As always, to everyone for being here. We do have one more session tomorrow of our Spring Break Survivor Speaker Series with second generation speaker Ron Schwartz. You can visit our website to register for that as well. Thank you again, Rosian, and everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.